Coup Against the Mississippi by Joseph Killorin Brennan, illustrated by Yoshi Miyake in July 1993. A boy named Lastings Howarth and his sister, Emma, worked together to complete a dangerous task. The Mississippi River was about to flood their farm, and it was their job to save their family's herd of 300 dairy cows. There was another problem besides the river. Lastings and Emma had very different personalities. Though there was no time to waste, Lastings was walking slowly, thinking, while Emma was rushing madly ahead. The brothers and sisters' different personalities were a lot like the moods of the Mississippi River. When the sun was shining, the river flowed lazily, but when the spring rains melted the winter snows, the river surged forward. The two children knew that as long as the river stayed within its banks, they were safe. Yet if it broke through the giant levees, they would need a lot of luck. If the water overflowed the levees, the flat land on either side of the river would soon be underwater, as it was before the levee system was built to keep the river in check. Levees, dams, and other structures to control flooding on the Mississippi River have been constructed continuously beginning about 1850. In 1993, by early summer, the melting snow had already turned the soil surrounding the Mississippi into a vast, saturated sponge. As the rain continued, the Mississippi began to rise rapidly. Flood preparation. Emma and Lastings lived with their parents in Galena, Illinois. Each spring, as the river began to rise, they heard the same warnings of flooding. Still, it was difficult for Emma and Lastings to believe that the river could actually do anything their levee couldn't handle. They had a hard time believing their grandparents' stories about the 1927 storm, when the Mississippi River had flowed through bedroom windows of their farmhouse. Still, they had practiced the safety drills. They knew that when the time came, their father and uncles would take all their valuable possessions to their cousins who lived on high ground, in a house that river water had never been able to reach. Their mother and aunts would take Emma and Lastings to a high school in Springfield. The school was also on high ground, and its gymnasium was used as an emergency shelter. Before the children could leave, however, it would be up to them to round up the cows and lead them to a long ridge on the Gettleman farm, the highest ground within walking distance of their own farm. This may seem like a tremendous responsibility for a young boy and girl. However, Emma, at 12, knew that her family needed to sell the cow's milk to make a living. She was up for the challenge. Emma and Lastings. Emma's younger brother, Lastings, who had his mother's family name as his first name, did everything slowly and deliberately. He didn't get as much work done as his sister, but whatever work he did was always done well. For example, in the fall, Emma could rake up the leaves on the front lawn in 2 hours by herself. Lastings raked the leaves in the side yard, which was only half as big as the front lawn. It took Lastings all afternoon, but he got every last leaf, while Emma would miss many of the leaves on the front lawn. Emma thought Lastings was lazy. She was convinced that she was always right, and that her way of working was the only way. Lastings, on the other hand, thought Emma was a runaway colt galloping in the wrong direction. She wasted perfectly good energy rushing through a task that Lastings knew could be done better if a good plan had been made beforehand. When Emma cooked breakfast, she cooked the bacon and eggs on the highest heat and then messily flipped them around so they wouldn't burn. She insisted that this would save time. Lastings' cooking tasted better, but by the time he was ready to serve breakfast, it was time for lunch. When they planted the vegetable garden, Lastings pulled out every last weed, drew diagrams of each plot, and measured each hole for each seed. Emma tore up the ground with her hoe and tossed seeds everywhere. Lastings didn't get a lot of seeds planted, but all of them would sprout. Emma planted a large area, but many of her plants died before any vegetables could be picked from them. The roundup, as you can imagine, the roundup of the cows did not begin smoothly. Emma couldn't wait to begin. Lastings wasn't much better. He refused to leave the house until he had planned a way to move all of the cows together in one group. He insisted that this would save time. By the time they got out the door, the river was at 46 feet, just 2 feet below the top of the levee. The rain had finally stopped, but according to the weather reports, the river had not yet crested or reached its highest level. Emma ran out across the grazing pasture, figuring that she'd easily be able to lead the cows toward a holding pen that was near the base of the Gettleman Ridge. The cows merely split up like bees from a down nest. Lastings plodded along behind Emma, shaking his head, and after an hour, he still hadn't corralled a single cow. While Emma had managed to put 5 in the pen, she'd done so only by driving each one with a stick and then walking all the way back to get the next. Lastings laughed at her. At that rate, it will be days before you get them all in. Yes, well, you aren't doing any better, she yelled as she ran to get the 6th cow. Don't worry. I've got a plan, Lastings said. The plan and Lastings did have an idea. Their cows moved as a group for only 2 reasons, to get milked in the morning and to get fed at night. Though it was the middle of the day, the rain and dark clouds made it look like dawn. Emma, go to the house, turn on all the lights, and slam the screen door about 50 times, he called to her. We're leaving the house, genius. The power is off, she rolled her eyes at him. Turn it on again, and then take the milking machine to the holding pen and start it up. She looked at him as if he were nuts. We need to fool these ladies into thinking it's morning milking time, he concluded. Though Emma sensed that Lastings was on to something, she didn't want to compliment him. She did as he said, however, and headed for the house. Emma slammed the screen door like her family and the farm hands did at the start of each morning. The cows stopped feeding and picked up their heads. Then, when Emma started the milking machine, they surged forward. They began to head for the barn, which was where the milking machine was usually kept. However, the machine had wheels and a portable generator. Emma pulled it into the holding pen, and the cows followed her. The whole bobbing mass of cows began to run along the fence toward the holding pen. As the last cow entered the pen, Lastings sprinted to the gate and slammed it shut. The first part of the job was done. The next step was to get the cows up the hill to the top of Gettleman's Ridge. The holding pen was attached to the fence that separated the Howarth and Gettleman farms. It had gates that opened onto each farm. Emma carefully opened the back gate, pulled the machine through after her, and closed the gate. Let's take the milking machine to the top of the ridge and start it up again. They both pulled the heavy machine up the ridge. At the top of the ridge, they started up the milking machine and then ran back down the hill to the holding pen. Lastings opened the gate, and the cows began to head uphill toward the milking machine. The cows were moving, but not fast enough to suit Emma. She ran along next to the herd, shouting, "Go, go." "Keep back," Lastings warned. "They'll go, but hang back," he cried. As usual, Emma ignored him. As a result, one of the oldest and slowest cows, Queenie, suddenly panicked and turned out of the herd. She stumbled down into a ditch and became stuck in the muck that rose up to her belly. Emma stopped in her tracks and turned back to look. "No, leave her," said Lastings. "We've got to keep the others running. We can't save them all, no matter how much we want to." Just then, a warning siren rang out over the fields. The siren meant that the river was about to flood its banks. Emma knew she had to save the herd before she could come back for Queenie. She pushed on, driving the herd forward as the siren mingled with Queenie's desperate moo. Saving Queenie. By the time Emma and Lastings got the cows to safety, they were exhausted. But as usual, Emma didn't stop to rest. "I can't leave Queenie," she cried. "I know," Lastings agreed. They hurried back toward the ditch. Emma marched straight into the muck and began tugging on Queenie's neck. Lastings stood at the edge, surveying the area. "Help me," Emma screamed, barely able to stand. Instead, Lastings ran toward the ruins of an old outbuilding that looked like a collapsed city tenement. He began pulling timbers out of the rubble. Emma quickly helped gather boards and then lay them out for Queenie. The cow tried to climb the bits of wreckage, but slipped, nearly crushing Lastings. "Slow down," Lastings shouted. "There has to be a better way to do this." He stood there thinking and sinking in the muck. Suddenly, the ground started to tremble beneath them. They turned and saw water trickling through the levee. With a roar, a giant slab of earth came off the top of the levee and brought down a wave of debris. The river was overflowing the levee. If they didn't move quickly, they would drown. In the distance, they saw that their father had returned from their cousin's house. He had been sandbagging a wall around the house, but now he was running toward them. He was too far away to help. "I've got to think this through," Lastings insisted, patiently collecting his thoughts as the water quickly approached them. "Are you nuts?" Emma cried. "The levee is topped. The river has flooded. We don't have time to think." But Lastings began rearranging the timbers under the cow as if he had all the time in the world. You'd never know that there was a wall of water rushing toward them, a wall that was crushing everything in its path. They saw their father jump into his truck, but they knew he wouldn't reach them in time. Lastings had arranged a long plank so that it stuck out from under the cow's rib cage like the high end of a seesaw. "Jump on the board when I do," Lastings yelled as the water bore down upon them. She didn't understand, but decided not to second-guess her brother one more time. She jumped, and together she and Lastings hit the board with all their weight. As they drove the diving board down, the other end of the timber went up and lifted Queenie's front legs enough so that she could pull herself out of the muck. Immediately, the cow started to scramble up the other timbers, free of the mud at last. "It worked! My plan worked!" Lastings shouted. Now it was Emma's turn to save the day by doing what came naturally. Her arms worked in a blur. She shoved and dragged and stuffed any piece of which she could grab under the cow without worrying about patterns, plans, or organization. Queenie seemed to understand. As she struggled out of the ditch, the cow placed her feet only on the wood Emma was spreading in front of her, not in the mud. Queenie was soon out of the ditch and trotted obediently behind the children as they raced up the hill. At the top of the hill, Emma and Lastings collapsed on the ground in complete exhaustion. 2 hours later, their father paddled up to the base of the ridge, which was now an island, in a canoe. "Hop in. The cows will be fine here until the water goes down," he said. "The truck is parked about a mile away, where the road is still above the water. From there, we can drive to the shelter at the high school and spend the night there." "You two did very well today," he said as he smiled at them. Emma and Lastings looked at each other, and they, too, smiled. Miss Impulse and Master Thought had found a way to work together to save the day.